All right, so we are now being recorded. All right, so welcome to video teleconference number 4. Just to reiterate, the goal of this video teleconference is to have a sort of live problem solving um, practice with you on the basics of Mendelian genetics. So I wouldn't know your background if you've fully understood already, or maybe you still have some questions. But I hope your questions will be addressed in this presentation. So first, our schedule. We are now ending January. Okay, so we are on January 27, and we are currently continuing our topic on Mendelian Genetics Chapter 3, this time Part 2 already. And I've already uploaded the problem set for Part 2 of Mendelian Genetics. So it's more complicated. It's related to probability that you've learned from statistics. So you'd be able to apply the concepts, no? The binomial probability and the multiplication and addition laws in probability in Part 2. Um, so I'd like to go back though, backtrack to Mendelian genetics part 1, the basics. Okay. But before that, these are the things that we've done so far. We had a homework, no, cell cycle, that was by group. Then we had quiz number 1, also on cell cycle. Then we had a prelim exam on the intro to genetics and the cell cycle. And then we had Mendelian genetics 1, homework and quiz. And presently we have homework for Mendelian Genetics 2. And soon I will be opening quiz number 3 for Mendelian Genetics Part 2. Okay, so this morning we are going to focus a review on Mendelian Genetics Part 1. So as you know, just to introduce a bit, Gregor Mendel's discovery actually paved the way for the improvement of the theory of evolution by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. Without Mendel's work on transmission genetics, no, the transmission of traits from parent to offspring, um, Darwin's and Wallace's work on evolution, natural selection, will be sort of very shallow, okay? Because we won't be able to explain the mechanism on how evolution happens without Mendel's work. So just to highlight that one, no? Remember that Mendel came very much later after both of the evolution theorists. So it was really just later on when um, the evolution theory was given the power, the mechanism that we now understand to happen. Let me go back. Okay, so this is how his work was like. So there's this illustration on how he actually crossed true breeding pea plants. So in terms of flower color, true breeding purple, true breeding white. So because these flowers actually self-fertilize, so he had to remove the male portions of one of the flowers. Now remove the male portions of one of the flowers and artificially pollinate the flower with the removed male parts. And when the flower got fertilized already by the sperm in the pollen, and the fruit was produced, the pea. So Mendel removed the seeds from the pod and planted them all individually. And he took into account how many of the offspring had purple flowers, how many had white. And of course, he was surprised in the F1 generation, all had purple flowers. Now, all had purple flowers. So what he did was he allowed those F1 generation purple flowered plants to self-fertilize or to self-pollinate. And he allowed them to fruit, and he got the fruit and planted the seeds to create the F2 generation. Now, in the F2 generation, That's where he observed that the white flower color trait came back. And what's more is when he tabulated or when he recorded the numbers, the ratio of the white colored flowered plants um, was approximately 1/4, okay, of all of the F2 offsprings. The rest, 3/4, had purple flowers. So this is what we call the monohybrid cross. Okay? So, question before we start the short answer quiz, self-quiz thing. Which one is the monohybrid here? Is it the P generation, the F1, or the F2 generation? Anyone? Including those who just came?
The F1, sir.
Yes. Okay, so we are talking about the F1 when we say monohybrid. Why? Because its parents were both pure breds or true breeding, and they had opposite traits and they were bred together. So resulting in the hybrid, which is the F1. Correct. Okay. So the monohybrid cross is the F1 times F1, no, in this case. Okay, so let me go back to my presentation. Okay, so if we sort of analyze this even deeper, let's go behind the traits that we can see. You know, the phenotypes is the observable trait. What's behind that will be the genotype, the composition of the alleles. Now, I will not explain anymore what alleles and genes are because I'm sure you've read about them. That are found in the organism itself. So we capitalize, we use a letter, specifically following the first letter of the recessive trait to symbolize the alleles, but we capitalize the letter for the dominant allele and small letter for the recessive allele. So we can see here using the Punnett square, the resulting ratio. Okay, so focus on the ratio here that we have on the lower right of F2 generation of the dihybrid cross. No? So these are the results. So genotypically, there is a 1 is to 2 is to 1 ratio. 1 big D homozygous dominant. 2 big D small d or hybrids, monohybrids. And 1 small d homozygous recessive. But in terms of phenotype, both big D and big D small d will show the dominant phenotype. So that's 3/4 tall. And then 1/4 for the small d dwarf. So this ratio is just going to be used again and again in the dihybrid cross, in the trihybrid cross, and even in the more number hybrid crosses. So prepare your papers and pens. I have some simple questions for you, and maybe we can discuss the answers. Okay? And we're gonna spend the rest of our time in this video teleconference practicing or analyzing these simple problems on Mendel. So this is related to Mendelian genetics part 1. Okay, while you're preparing, let me also just mention the two laws that Mendel came up with his work. So first, there was the law of segregation, meaning to say that we actually inherit two alleles for a character, no? So for example, um, in pea plants, the flower color, the pea plant inherits two alleles, one from the father, one from the mother. Okay? So, and then during gamete formation, the forming of sperm or egg, those two alleles separate independently. That's what you call the law of segregation. Yeah, so there's the law of segregation. So are you ready? May I hear from you?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, so no pressure. This is non-graded. Just to review. Okay, so first let's start with the dihybrid cross. Okay? So this is the dihybrid cross. Okay, and you would know because there are two pairs of alleles. Okay, and one allele in a pair is actually dominant and the other allele is recessive. Okay, and each of the parents, because these are the parents, contain a pair. So, say for example, we will let these symbols be these phenotypes. Okay, number one, what proportion of the offspring will have round and yellow seeds? And number two, so let me just show all. So you either give me a fraction or a decimal. Okay, if anyone's done, you may say the answer.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
For round and yellow seeds, the proportion would be 9 out of 16 seeds.
All right, that is correct. Okay, that is correct. So I will explain after you answer number two why it's like that, not just to be clear. Number one is 9 out of 16. What about number two? Maybe another person? Or anyone who has an answer for number two already?
Three out of 16, sir.
That is correct. All right, that is correct. Both are correct answers. So let me just explain. I maybe you already know, no, you have a process, but let me just explain again why it's like that. You always go back to this monohybrid cross that I have here on the lower right, no. Um, if you notice, what's being asked in numbers one and two are phenotypes or genotypes.
The phenotype, sir.
Okay, the phenotypes. So you go back to this monohybrid cross that I have here on the right, and then look at the phenotype proportions. Okay, that one, 3/4 and 1/4. But the only difference is we now have a dihybrid. Now, meaning to say we are tracking two characters, not just one. So in the first question, proportion of offspring that will have round and yellow seeds, the way I usually solve this is I take each of those characters separately. So first, let's focus with round. Okay, so let's focus with round. So if you look at the um, assignment here, round is actually a dominant character or dominant trait. Okay? And if you look at the composition of the alleles here, big W, small w, for both parents, it very much follows the monohybrid cross. So, phenotypically, what proportion will come up as round if you have this cross? Diba? So, you go back here to the bottom right. Okay? So, in here, the proportion of the dominant trait coming out is 3/4. So that's what I'm going to use as my proportion for the round character or trait. Then I'm gonna focus on the yellow, the color trait or the color character. Same story, I have big G, small g for both. Okay? And the resulting question here is yellow seeds, raw yellow seeds. Okay? And yellow is also dominant. And if you go back to your monohybrid cross here, dominants would usually come up 3 out of 4 times. So 3 out of 4 also yung yellow. Now, since because these happen together, what rule of probability do we use? Multiplication or addition?
Multiplication, sir.
Okay, so we multiply.
Multiplication, sir.
Yes, so we multiply these. So that's how you got 9 out of 16. Okay, so the answer a while ago was correct. So the same technique can be done for number 2. You know, sabi dito, offspring now is wrinkled. And wrinkled is a recessive trait. Okay, so if we look at our reference box here on the right for the monohybrid cross, um, recessive traits phenotypically would come up 1/4 no, of the time. So that's 1/4 for wrinkled. And then the partner is wrinkled and yellow seeds. So yellow is dominant though. So you go back to your table. If you remember, that's actually 3/4 out of the time. So if we multiply these, we arrive with a number na 3, or 3 out of 16. And this was also the answer a while ago. So you were both correct. All right. So that's one technique that I am using in order to answer these problems. So let's move on. Okay. So same dihybrid cross, but these are now the questions. So please answer numbers 3 and 4. If you already have the answer, just use your audio and speak up.
Hello, sir. Uh,
Yes,
Go on 2 out of 16, sir.
that's for number.
That's for number 3, sir.
Okay, that is correct. Number 3 is 2 out of 16. Right, and then number 4.
2 out of 16, Japon, sir.
Both answers are correct. Okay, so let me explain. So what are we dealing with now? Phenotypes or genotypes?
The genotype, sir.
All right. So in our
Genotype.
reference, both are correct. Both of you are correct. Thank you. So we will now look at our reference here from the monohybrid cross, but we are going to look at the ratios for the genotypes. Okay. So number 3, proportion of offspring that will have the genotype big W, big G, small g. So again, I will deal with these separately. I'll start first with the W's. Okay. So this big W, from the cross big big W, small w. So I look at the reference, and that's 1 out of 4, no, as a result. So I'm gonna put here 1 out of 4 for big W, and then for the other character, big G, small g, okay, if I look at the genotype ratios, my reference on the right, that's 2 out of 4. That's 2 out of 4. So because they are happening together, okay, so we multiply and then we arrive with 2 out of 16. So this was the answer a while ago, and that is correct. Okay. So for number 4, we look at first big W, small w. Okay. And that's 2 out of 4. And then look at the next pair of alleles, small g, and that's 1 out of 4. If we multiply these, we get 2 out of 16. Okay, so both answers a while ago were correct. All right, let's continue. Now, there are crosses that are, they might look like dihybrid, but they are not. Okay, so we'll start dealing with them in this problem. So here we have the same characters, okay, the shape and the color of the seed. We have the parents, round yellow, crossed with wrinkled green, the parent. And these are their offspring. 1/4 round yellow, 1/4 round green, 1/4 wrinkled yellow, 1/4 wrinkled green. Okay? First and foremost, how would you know this is not dihybrid cross anymore? Look at the proportions of the offsprings. In a dihybrid, you will always have a 9:3:3:1 for the genotypes. But here, we have a 1:1:1:1. So this is not a dihybrid cross. That's why I placed dihybrid cross. But the principle is still the same, no? In order for us to solve this. So here's the question. What are the genotypes of the parents? Okay, so I'll give you time to answer. And then I will explain the answer.
Hello, sir. Kuan, sir. Big W, small w, big G, small g, and small w, small g, small g.
Is correct. Okay, so there's already an answer. Are there any other answers aside from that? Before we try to solve this, okay, so maybe okay, stick with that answer, no? Remember that answer. But take note, this is now not a dihybrid cross. Obviously, from the ratio of the offspring, it doesn't follow a phenotypic ratio of 9:3:3:1. So therefore, we cannot use this reference anymore because the using of the reference monohybrid cross will only apply to true dihybrid crosses. Okay, so this time around we have something new. Okay, but in order for us to solve this, I still go with the same strategy. I look at the characters one at a time. So first, let's look at the shapes of the seeds. Okay, let's look at the round, 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 and then you have wrinkled, and then wrinkled. Okay, if you don't consider the color, just the shape, you would notice how many ang round. That's one half. One half of the offspring is round. Okay, and if you look at the wrinkled, okay, that's 1/4 plus 1/4. That's also one half of the offspring is wrinkled. And if you look at your parent's phenotype, you already have a round and a wrinkled. So if we analyze this, the second parent is already wrinkled. So there's no question there. It's small w, small w. So yung answer a while ago, correct yung small w mo. Okay? But the problem is, what about the round on the other parent? What do you have to cross with small w to get one half na round? Okay? So if you do trial and error, no, small w, what will I do? What about big W, sir? Is it okay if we use big W, big W? Anyone?
No, sir, because that would lead to all-round pod, sir.
Yes, okay. So hindi pwede no? Not that one, not that one. Okay. What about, do we have another option? Can I use small w, small w?
Hindi po,
No,
sir,
sir.
kay wrinkled tanan.
Oh, tapos ang parent, look at the phenotype, round man. So hindi pwedeng small w, small w. The only alternative to big W is the big W, small w. Diba? So that's what we're going to put here. No? And in fact, if you do the cross here, if you do the Punnett square, one half will be big W, small w, round, and one half will be small w, wrinkled. And that's exactly the ratios that we have here, one half, one half. Okay? So, correct so far ang answer kanina. Now, let's look at the next character. Okay, the color. Okay, let's look at the yellow and yellow. 1/4 plus 1/4 na yellow, that's one half yellow. If we look at the green, 1/4 plus 1/4 green, that's going to be one half na green. So basically the same ratio as the previous one. Okay, so let's look at the phenotype of our parent. The second parent is green, so obviously that's already a small g, small g. So the answer a while ago was correct. So itong partner na lang niya. With the same principle as we did here for the round and wrinkled, okay, we know it can either be big G, or big G, small g. But if we use big G here, as we showed here, impossible, because then all the offspring will have yellow seeds. So therefore, this one is big G, small g. So the answer a while ago that was given was correct. All right, so this is our cross that looks like a dihybrid cross but is not. Okay, so take note of that. So let's continue. Okay, so we have this cross big W, big G, small g times small w, small g. Still quote unquote dihybrid cross because it's not. So here are the questions. Once you have the answer, just speak up.
Hello, sir. Uh, I'll try lang, sir. One half will be round and yellow seed, sir.
Sorry, one half for the first one.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. So, Mr. Baconga, you gave genotype na answer, no? Okay. Ganina ra to. Okay. Naglag. Sige. Um, so there was an answer, one half. Okay, what about, okay, we'll see if that's correct later on. What about number two? Any answers for number two?
Hello, sir. For number
Yes.
two, sir, I'll try lang, sir. I think none will have the genotype big
Okay.
W, small w, big G, big G. Yes, sir.
Okay. Sige. All right. So let's solve this one. Again, these are non-dihybrid crosses, even if they look like dihybrid because there are two characters. Okay, but they're not. Okay. So therefore, we cannot use this. Okay. I hope you did not use this as reference. Okay. So first, let's start with number one, proportion of the offspring that will have round. Okay. And yellow seed. So let's start with the round character first. If you look at the parents, one parent is homozygous round, and the other parent is homozygous wrinkled, no recessive. Um, if you are going to make a cross, big W by small w, the big W and big W will always pair up with the small w. So in other words, you will always have a big W and then a small w all the time. No? Okay. So I said always, so meaning to say that's 1 out of 1 or 100% probability. Now let's look at the next character, yellow seeds. And we have here a parent na heterozygous yellow. And we have a parent na homozygous green, which is the recessive trait. Okay. And this is similar to the 1/2 that we have talked about a while ago, no? Big G, small g, small g, small g. So this is going to be resulting to 1/2 na yellow and 1/2 na green if you're going to cross these two. So since we are being asked for yellow, that's going to be 1/2 yellow. So 1 times 1/2, okay, that's 1/2. So the answer a while ago was correct. Okay, so next, proportion of offspring that will have the genotype big W, small w, and big G, big G. So for big W, small w, this one, we already figured it out here. Now, big W, small w is sure. So that's 100%. So our only thing to figure out now is big G, big G. Now, take note that this is a pair of alleles. So one of them is from the father, one is from the mother. Okay? So the first big G is perhaps from the first parent, no? The one here with the big G. But the second big G should be from the other parent, in which case our next parent doesn't have a big G. It's all small g. So the probability of getting this big G from these parents is actually none, zero. So the answer is none of the offspring will have this genotype. And the answer a while ago was also correct. Okay, so this one is the last one. So we have a tri-hybrid cross. So we're including tall dwarf traits in the mix. These are the questions. So if you have an answer, just speak up right away. Anyone has an answer for number one?
Yes, sir.
All right.
For each parent, it would be 8 gametes.
Okay. Okay, we'll see if that's correct later. What about for number 2? 2 or 3?
9 out of 64, sir. Number 2.
That's number 2. Okay, so we'll see if that's correct later on. Number 3. I think one of you has turned their mic
Or
on.
18.
Number 3. Okay, while waiting for number 3, maybe I'll start explaining for 1 and 2. Okay. Okay, later number 3, later na lang. Okay, for number 1, or for all of these, this is a true tri-hybrid cross, because if you look at all of the alleles, they are all different. No, there's a dominant allele and then there's a recessive allele for all three characters. So therefore, we may use our reference box here at the bottom. Okay, so first and foremost, how many gametes can be formed from each parent? So um, what you need to remember here is you go back to the monohybrid, which is, for example, big D, small d. Okay, how many gametes can someone with a big D and small d na allele create? So obviously, these two can separate. You can have a gamete na D, capital D, and then you can have a gamete na small d. So how many gametes? Two, right? Okay. So there's always that constant number 2. Okay. But how did we get with the actual number 2? That's because there's only one monohybrid here. Okay, one character that we are talking about. So this is 2 to the power of n, which is the number of characters. And in this case, there are 1, 2, 3 characters for each parent. So that's 2 to the power of 3 characters, the tri-hybrid. And the answer is 8. So the answer a while ago was correct, 8. Okay. Next, let's look at number 2. Okay, so in number 2, proportion of offspring that will be dwarf, okay, with round and yellow seed. So we will answer this as I answer per character. The first dwarf, okay, and what's the proportion that it will be dwarf? Dwarf is recessive, no? So phenotype also, this is phenotype. So look at this proportion here. That's 1/4 dwarf. Okay, next round. Round seeded. Round is dominant, no, as we can see here, capital W. And this is phenotype, and dominant trait appears 3/4 of the time. So that's 3/4. And lastly, yellow. Yellow is also a dominant trait, as we can see here, capital G. And dominant traits appear 3/4 of the time phenotypically. So you have these numbers to multiply. So 3 times 3, that's 9. 4 times 4, 16. Times 4, that's 9 out of 64. So the answer a while ago was also correct. Okay, lastly, number 3. Who has an answer? No one has an answer yet for number 3? Anyone?
Try sir.
All right,
2 out of 64.
that is correct. Okay, so if you look at our first pair of alleles, this is now genotype, no? So big D, and this is true trihybrid. So you look at here, big D, that's 1 out of 4. Okay, and then small w. So you look at here, similar to this, that's also 1 out of 4. And lastly, big G, small g, that's this one in the middle, that's 2 out of 4. So the correct answer here will be 2 out of 64. Right. So I hope you have learned, some basic techniques in, figuring out these proportions in the Mendelian genetics and transmission genetics. Because in the current topic that we are in right now, although it's still Mendelian genetics, it's sort of more on analysis already. We are including concepts of probability in the mix already, and it might be more challenging for you. But if you understood the basics, like when you were solving a while ago, and you solved it yourself, no, it will be easier to understand even the more complicated parts of Mendelian genetics. So just a reminder, your third homework, for now, we have a due date, and that's going to be on January 30, 2021, midnight. And there is also a planned quiz on Mendelian Genetics Part 2, also on the same date. Now, this is planned because I don't know if time might be too constrained. I might change some of the schedules, and I will just inform you ahead of time. Are there any concerns or questions so far? Questions, concerns? There seems to be none.
Ragnan na, sir.
All right. So I thank you very much for joining this video teleconference. No, a recording of this will be posted later on, and I hope you will have more enjoyable time, more time to enjoy on solving the problem set that is currently being solved right now, and just continue solving, guys. Do not give up. You might have many scratch papers to crumple before you arrive at the correct answer, but that's fine. That's really how it is. Okay. So with practice, that's the only option that we have in order to become better at this. Okay. So have a productive day ahead. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you in the next video teleconference and online. You are now all dismissed.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye, sir.